Hi friends, my name is Nilesh. In this video, we are going to see how to use the Copilot for Azure. If you have used the Copilot for Visual Studio Code or GitHub Copilot, you would already know that how it helps the developers in their usual workflows. It helps to write better code, it helps to give suggestions, and it almost works like a pair programmer. I've been using like the command line tools for interacting with Microsoft Azure and also the Azure portal. But we all know that every time we have to switch from, let's say, the Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, our code editor, to a command line, or go to a browser to do something, it interrupts the developer's workflow. This is where the GitHub's Copilot for Azure comes in very handy. Let's get onto the screen and see how we can make use of this wonderful addition to the developer's arsenal. So to get started, first thing we need is to install this Visual Studio Code extension. I'm going to start by installing. It's named the GitHub Copilot for Azure. And once I have installed, one of the prerequisites for this is I also need access to the GitHub Copilot. Now, what this allows me to do is use the Copilot chat feature and then use the context as Azure. I can ask questions, I can interact with the Copilot in the context of Microsoft Azure. So let's get started, and I can say @Azure, which is like the intent or the persona I want to use when I'm running these different queries or when I'm asking these questions in natural language. Sometimes we might have this problem connecting to the Microsoft Azure. So the first thing I would do here is to run this change tenant command, or run the change tenant as the option, and it will show us what are the different tenants I have. I would use one of these. This is to define the scope in which the Azure Copilot has to answer the queries. Now it says that my scope has been set to the default directory. Let's get started with asking very basic questions like how many resource groups are there in my subscription. So this is like if I want to run the command on the command line to list the resource group, or if I go on to the Azure portal and I go into the resource group tabs, the list of resource groups that I get over there is what I am expecting as the response here. And since this works with the GitHub Copilot, I also have the option here to change the model which is used, or large language model, or the language model for that matter, which is used to answer the questions. So here we can see currently GPT-4o is the selected option, but I can switch between O1 mini in preview or O3 mini or Cloud 3.5 Sonnet. I'm going to stick with the default GPT-4o. And we can see in the response here, it says that I have 3 subscriptions, and these are the number of subscriptions which are there. I have 1 resource in one of these subscriptions. There are 21 resources in the other one, which is the one currently I'm using, and it has got 0 resources. So now I know that I've got 21 resources. I can say list me the type of resources in the subscription with 21 resources. So it will again go back and go through the Microsoft Azure resource graph, and it will generate the query to get me the details about those resources. Now the good thing here is it will tell me what are the different types of resources. It gives a quick summary saying I've got 14 compute disk, I've got 7 storage accounts, I've got 6 network security groups, and things like that. I know that in my subscription, I'm also having a Azure Kubernetes Service Managed cluster. So I want to ask a question like, is there any AKS cluster in my subscription? Hopefully it will come back saying, yeah, I do have a AKS cluster in my subscription. And then I can go and ask additional questions related to that particular cluster. So here it gives me again the summary saying that I've got one AKS cluster in my subscription in Australia. The name of that cluster is Azure Melbourne cluster. The type is managed cluster. Location is Australia Southeast. Then it gives other details like the resource group, the provisioning state, Kubernetes version. Currently it's in stopped state, and what's the fully qualified name for accessing this particular cluster. It also gives various other details like the network profile, agent profile, and the configuration and things around that cluster. Now let's do one more thing, which is like give me the list of resource name and the resource types in the subscription in a tabular form. So I'm trying to get a list in the table with the name and the type of resource. This is again like a summary. Instead of getting that list in the listed form, I would like to get the output in tabular form here. And here we can see that it has given the name of the resource and what is the resource type. So again, quite a handy scenario here where I can interact with the Azure resources and get details about them, get information about them using this very handy Azure Copilot. Now it doesn't give the whole list, but what it does is it gives summary of about 8 or 10 different resources I have, and then it also gives me a query which I can take from here and run it as part of the Azure Resource Graph. That's one option where I can say take this query here and run it on the Azure Resource Graph. If I want, I also get additional suggestions here in case I want to export this as a CSV file. You can see a question here like how can I export the list of resources in CSV file. Then if I want to perform a filter kind of operations when listing, I also get these suggestions. So it's not just the answers to the questions that I am raising. The Copilot for Azure is also intelligent enough to give relevant suggestions as to what could be the next step in my interaction with the Copilot or my interaction with the Azure resources. Now let's say I want to try some other queries saying I know that in my subscription I've got resources spread across different data centers or different regions in Azure. So I can say how many resources are there in Australia region. I moved recently or a few months back from Singapore to Australia, and I have some resources in Southeast Asia region, which is Singapore, and I have some resources in Australia. So my query here or my question to the Azure Copilot is give me the list of resources which are only within Australia. Now it says I've got 37 resources here, and let's say I want to find out how many resources are there in Singapore region. So right now I don't have anything in the Singapore region. This is a bit surprising because I think I do have some resources. So sometimes we might come across these kind of answers where it tries to gauge or it tries to guess the location here, and we can see that the query is definitely wrong. The location here is not Singapore, but it should have been Southeast Asia or whatever is the equivalent region in Singapore. But in most cases, I found that the Azure Copilot is giving the relevant answers, and it does make the workflow of the user quite interactive. I don't have to remember what are the CLI commands, or I don't have to go away from the Visual Studio Code to find out some information. And just to demonstrate that, again, going back to the AKS cluster type of questions, I can say what type of networking is used by the AKS cluster in Melbourne. So let's see what does it answer to our question. So here we can see that it does give us an answer correctly, saying I have this AKS cluster named as the Azure Melbourne cluster. It is in Melbourne, and the network plugin it's using is Azure. The load balancer type that is used here is standard, and it also gives the CIDR and the DNS service IP. So with that, I think I'm quite happy with the interactions I have had with the Azure Copilot. If you want to learn more about this, what I've touched is just a very high level surface. When you go into installing the Azure Copilot extension or GitHub Copilot for Azure as a Visual Studio Code extension, in the details you can see what are the different capabilities of this particular extension. So first and foremost, it can be used to learn things about Azure, like what are the different services, technologies. It can give us information about AI, compute, containers, DevOps, network security, storage related things. It can also help us manage the resources in terms of the resource management. We can go and look at things like cost management. We can get help regarding the estimates of the cost, and we can query different cost related features. From a developer point of view, it also integrates with the Azure Developer CLI AZD, and we can ask it to perform things like initialize, configure, and deploy instructions using the AZD. And there are various other things. So I hope you found this useful, and do give it a try. Let me know in the comments if you found this useful. Thanks for watching this video. Until next time, code with passion and strive for excellence.